The sun was warm on her shoulders, but Maya always felt a small, quiet shadow inside. It was the shadow of a memory, of a strong hand holding hers, of a laugh that rumbled like distant
For your
thunder.
actions, you are hereby
It had been
commended.
18
Thank you, sir.
years since
Your
that
service
hand had
honors
let
us
go.
all.
Yes, sir.
She was 7 when the men in uniform came to the door. Their faces were tight and their words were careful, but their eyes told the whole story. Her
All
father,
systems
a
operational,
Navy
sir.
SEAL,
Awaiting further
was not
directives.
coming home.
Lieutenant,
After
we have
the
a
big
situation.
funeral with all
Sir,
the flags
what are your
and
orders?
guns firing
Lock it down,
shots
now.
into the air,
Yes, sir.
life had to become quiet. Her mother, Elena, decided they should move. The house on the base held too many echoes. The clang of his boots on the floor, the smell of his coffee in the morning.
At ease, everyone.
So they found
We
a
have
small
critical
house in a
situation
town
developing.
where
I need
no
your
one
full
knew them.
attention and immediate
It was
action.
easier that way. Elena got a job
At
at the
ease,
local
soldier.
library,
Excellent
and
work on
Maya
the
went to a
operation.
normal school with normal kids at school. When Father's Day projects came around, Maya would make a card for her grandfather. When other kids talked about their dads teaching them to ride a bike or throw a ball, Maya would just listen and smile a small smile. If someone asked, "What does your dad do?" she had her answer ready. "He served in the Navy," she would say, her voice calm and clear. It was the truth, but it was a quiet, simple version of a much bigger truth. She learned to hold the whole story inside her chest, the proud parts, the scary parts, the lonely parts. It was a heavy thing to carry, but she carried it so well that no one ever saw the weight at home. It was different. In a box on the top shelf of her mother's closet, there were treasures. There was a picture of her father, not in his gear, but in jeans, holding her up on his shoulders, both of them laughing. There was a heavy, polished coin with an eagle on it. And there was a folded flag in a wooden case. Some nights, when the house was too quiet, her mother would take the box down. They wouldn't say much. Elena would just hold the picture, and Maya would run her fingers over the cool metal of the coin. Their grief was a silent language they both understood. As Maya grew older, the feeling didn't go away. It just changed shape. In college, while her friends worried about exams and parties, Maya would sometimes stare out the window. She wondered about the men who had served with her father. Were they okay? Did they have families who worried every single day? She felt connected to a world most people never saw, a world of duty and sacrifice and quiet goodbyes. She was proud, fiercely proud, but it was a private pride. To everyone else, she was just Maya, a good student, a loyal friend, a little on the quiet side. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, a formal letter arrived. It was stiff, official paper. The Naval Special Warfare Command was dedicating a new building, a place where future SEALs would train. It was going to be named in honor of a group of men who had given everything, and her father's name was on that list. They were inviting the families to the ceremony. Maya's mother held the letter for a long time, her fingers tracing the embossed seal. "We don't have to go, you know," Elena said softly. Her voice held a tiredness from years of being strong. "Those things, they can be hard. All those people, all those memories on display." Maya looked at her mother, at the lines of strength and sadness on her face. She thought about the box in the closet, about the quiet pride she held inside. She thought about her father, who had chosen a life of service. He hadn't done it for applause. He had done it because he believed in it. "I think we should go," Maya said, her voice firmer than she expected. "Not for them. For him. I want to be there. For the quiet part, in the back. I think he'd want us to be there, to see that he's not forgotten." Her mother studied her face, seeing the young woman she had become, seeing the same stubborn set of the jaw that her father had. Finally, Elena nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "For him. We'll go for him." In the days before the ceremony, Maya chose her clothes carefully. A simple, dark dress. Nothing that would draw attention. She didn't want to stand out. She didn't want to be the seal's daughter for a day. She just wanted to be a daughter, honoring her father. She practiced her calm face in the mirror, the one that didn't show the storm of feelings underneath. She was going to witness, to remember, and to remain, as she always had. Quietly in the background, the morning of the ceremony dawned bright and clear. As she got ready, Maya felt that familiar small shadow inside. But today it felt different. It wasn't just the shadow of loss. It was the shadow of his legacy, walking with her. She didn't know what the day would hold, but she knew she was ready to carry the weight, just for a little while, in a place where he had once lived and served. She took a deep breath, looked at the old photo of her dad one more time, and closed the closet door. It was time to go. The car ride to the naval base was a long one, filled with a silence that wasn't empty, but full. Maya's mother drove, her hands steady on the wheel, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. The landscape changed from their quiet neighborhood to the open highway, and finally to the roads lined with signs pointing to military gates. With each mile, the air itself seemed to grow heavier, charged with a feeling Maya couldn't quite name. It was a mix of duty, memory, and a faint thread of dread as they approached the main gate. A young guard in a crisp uniform stepped forward. Maya's mother rolled down the window, and before she could say a word, the guard saw the special pass on the dashboard. His eyes, which had been professionally sharp, softened just a fraction. He looked from the pass to the two women in the car. He didn't smile, but he gave a single, slow nod. It was a small thing, but it was a look of understanding. "Proceed straight to Lot C, ma'am," he said, his voice respectful. "And welcome." That welcome, simple as it was, felt different. It was an acknowledgement. They were crossing from the outside world into his dot. The base was a world of its own. Everything was orderly, clean, and purposeful. Low, sturdy buildings were laid out in neat lines. People walked with a certain kind of posture, backs straight, steps quick. The sound was different too, the distant hum of machinery, the clear call of a voice giving instructions somewhere. Maya felt out of place in her simple dress, like she had accidentally walked onto a stage where everyone else knew their lines. They found the lot, filled with other cars. Some had family stickers on the back windows, little silhouettes of soldiers and flags. They parked next to a truck with a bumper sticker that read, "SEAL Team, the only easy day was yesterday." Maya read it and felt a chill. That was something her father used to say. It was a saying from his world, a world that felt both incredibly close and infinitely far away. Walking toward the new building, they joined a stream of people. There were men with short haircuts and serious eyes, some in uniform decorated with ribbons and patches, some in civilian clothes, but with that same watchful bearing. There were families' wives holding the hands of fidgeting children, older parents leaning on each other for support. Maya and her mother didn't speak to anyone. They just moved with the crowd, two more faces in a sea of people bound by a common thread of loss and honor. The new training facility was a massive, modern structure of steel and glass, but it had a solemn feel. In front of it was a large plaza with a new memorial wall, its dark stone still gleaming. People were already gathering, finding seats on the folding chairs set up in rows. Maya gently guided her mother toward the middle, a few rows from the back. It was the perfect spot. They could see everything, but they wouldn't be in the spotlight. They could be present without being participants. Settling into her chair, Maya let her eyes wander. She saw a man a few rows ahead, his arm around a boy of about 10. The boy was wearing a suit that was a little too big, and he was holding a framed photograph of a smiling sailor on his lap. Maya's throat tightened. She looked away and saw an elderly couple. The woman was clutching a small flag, her knuckles white. Her husband had his hat in his hands, turning it around and around, a nervous habit. Everywhere she looked, she saw a piece of her own story reflected in the faces around her. The quiet grief, the stubborn pride, the adjustment to a life with an empty chair at the table. On the stage, important-looking people were beginning to take their seats. Officers in dress uniforms, covered in medals, a few civilians in suits. The podium stood waiting, the seal of the Navy Special Warfare Command shining on its front. The air buzzed with low conversation, the rustle of programs. The occasional quiet sob quickly hushed. Maya's mother reached over and found her hand. She didn't look at her. She just held it tightly. Her palm was cool and a little clammy. Maya held back just as tight. In that grip, they said everything they couldn't say out loud. I'm here. I remember. This is hard. I love you. A hush began to fall over the crowd, starting from the front and rolling back like a wave. The ceremony was about to begin. A senior officer stepped to the podium, his voice booming out over the speakers, welcoming everyone. Maya tried to listen, but the words sometimes blurred together. They spoke of valor, of brotherhood, of the unbreakable spirit of the warriors this building was named for. They were good words, true words, but they were big words. They were for the public, for history. Maya's mind drifted to the small, true words. The words that weren't in any speech. The sound of her father singing her silly songs off-key. The way he would toss her in the air until she screamed with laughter. The feel of his rough cheek when he kissed her goodnight. That was the man she was here for. Not the legend, but the dad. She held on to those memories like stones in her pocket, solid and real. As the formal program moved forward, she knew the program would call for families to stand. She had seen it at the funeral long ago. She prepared herself, her body tense. When the officer asked for the spouses, her mother did not move. She sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead, her back rigid. Maya understood. Some grief was too private to stand up in front of hundreds of people. When the officer asked for the children to rise, Maya took a quick, shallow breath. Around her, a handful of people stood a man in his 40s, a young woman in uniform herself. Following a sudden, fierce impulse, Maya stood up too. For 2 seconds, 3 at most, she was visible. Then she sat back down, quickly, her heart pounding. It was enough. She had done it. She had, in her own small way, stood for him. As she settled back into her seat, she noticed a man on the very end of the stage. He was older, his hair silver, but he sat with a straight-backed ease that spoke of a lifetime of command. His uniform was different from the others, adorned with 4 small stars on the shoulder. He wasn't looking at the speaker. His calm blue eyes were slowly, thoughtfully, scanning the crowd. They moved past the VIPs, past the front rows, drifting over the many faces in the audience. There was a quiet intensity to his gaze, as if he wasn't just seeing people, but reading stories. His eyes passed over Maya, paused for the briefest moment, and then continued on. She felt a flicker of something, a strange sense of being seen, but then it was gone. The general's face gave nothing away. He simply continued his quiet observation as the next speaker took the podium. The ceremony settled into a rhythm. Speaker after speaker came to the podium. They talked about courage, about the importance of the new training facility, about the legacy of the fallen. The words were powerful, and many in the audience nodded, wiped their eyes, or held a loved one's hand a little tighter. Maya listened, she really did. But after a while, the speeches began to feel like a river flowing past her. The language was formal, filled with terms like ultimate sacrifice and enduring freedom. They were important ideas, but they felt big and distant, like monuments in a park you look at, but don't touch. Her mind kept drifting back to the small, quiet memories. The time her father tried to make pancakes on a Sunday morning and set off the smoke alarm. The way he would let her polish his dog tags until they shone, telling her they were pocket mirrors for giants. Those were the things that made her heart ache and smile at the same time. The official stories on the stage were about heroes. Her memories were of a man who was also a dad. She held on to those private pictures in her mind, using them as an anchor in the sea of formal words. On the stage, the 4-star general was finally introduced. His name was spoken with a deep respect that made the previous hush seem noisy. The air itself seemed to grow stiller. He walked to the podium not with a stiff march, but with a calm, solid pace. He didn't need to demand attention. He simply had it. He adjusted the microphone slightly and looked out at the crowd. His eyes, that same calm blue she had noticed before, seemed to take in everyone and everything all at once. He began to speak, and his voice was different. It wasn't booming or practiced. It was lower, quieter, almost conversational, but it carried to the very last row without any effort. He didn't talk about grand ideas first. He started with a story. A small one. Many years ago, he began, I was a young officer, greener than grass, on a training exercise that was going about as well as a root canal. It was cold, the equipment was failing, and we were all tired and frustrated. A faint, knowing chuckle rippled through some of the older veterans in the crowd. There was a chief with us, the general continued, a hint of a smile on his face. A quiet man. While the rest of us were complaining, he just got to work. He fixed a broken radio with a piece of wire and some chewing gum. Then he boiled water on a tiny stove and made a pot of the worst, strongest coffee any of us had ever tasted. He passed it around and said, The problem isn't the cold, gentlemen. It's that we stopped talking to each other. Now, drink up and let's figure this out. The general paused, letting the simple story settle. He didn't give a speech about teamwork. He just made terrible coffee and reminded us we were a team. That's the kind of man he was. His name was Daniel Carter. When he said the name, it was like a bolt of lightning shot through Maya's body. She felt her mother's hand flinch in hers. The air rushed from her lungs. She sat up straighter, every part of her focused on the man at the podium. He was talking about her dad, not as a statue or a name on a wall, but as a real person who fixed radios with gum and made bad coffee. Tears, hot and sudden, welled up in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She just stared, her heart hammering against her ribs. The general's speech slowly widened from that one story. He talked about the other men being honored that day, sharing little fragments of them to one's terrible sense of humor, another's incredible skill at cards, another's love for his baby daughter whose picture he showed everyone. He spoke of them as brothers, as friends, as flawed and funny and brilliant men. He was building a memorial made of words, not of stone. And it felt more real than anything that had been said all morning as he neared the end of his remarks. His tone grew more serious, but it was a gentle seriousness. We spend a lot of time talking about the warrior, he said, his eyes moving slowly across the audience. We talk about his strength, his skill, his courage. And we should. But a warrior's heart isn't formed here on the grinder or in the heat of a fight. He gestured to the new building behind him. It's formed at home. It's forged in the love of a family. The courage they show isn't just about facing danger. It's about letting their loved one go, day after day, knowing what they might be asked to do. It's about waiting. It's about answering a doorbell and having your world change forever. He leaned slightly into the microphone, his voice dropping even lower, making everyone lean in to hear. The legacy of these men doesn't just live in our history books or in this fine building. It lives in the families they left behind, in the spouses who carry on, in the parents who endure a pain no parent should, and in the children who grow up with a memory where a guide should be. His gaze, which had been sweeping the room, seemed to slow. It traveled past the first few rows of dignitaries. It moved over the middle section, where Maya sat frozen, clutching her mother's hand. His eyes, those calm, knowing eyes, stopped. They landed directly on her face. It wasn't a glance. It was a look of recognition, so deep and certain it felt like he had spoken her name. For a long, breathless second, he just looked at her. The entire audience seemed to disappear. It was just the general, from his place of ultimate honor on the stage, and a young woman sitting in a middle row, her face pale with shock. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't to the crowd. It was to her God then. He did something that broke all protocol. He slowly, deliberately, stepped back from the podium. He turned and walked to the side of the stage, descending the few steps to the ground level. A confused murmur rustled through the crowd. Speakers didn't do this. Where was he going? The officers on stage watched, their faces masks of professional calm, but their eyes were wide with surprise. The general began to walk up the central aisle. His steps were measured and sure. People shifted in their seats, turning to watch him pass. He moved past the important guests in the front. He continued down the aisle, his eyes fixed ahead. The murmur of the crowd faded into a tense, electric silence. All you could hear was the soft, steady crunch of his dress shoes on the paved plaza. Maya watched him come closer, her mind blank with a kind of buzzing shock. He was walking right toward her section. Her mother's grip on her hand was so tight, it was almost painful. The older couple in front of her turned around, their faces full of wonder and confusion. The general didn't look to the left or the right. He walked straight up to her row, stopped, and turned to face her. He was standing right in front of her. For a moment that stretched out like rubber, the entire world narrowed to a single point. It was the space between where Maya sat, frozen in her chair, and where the four-star general stood, looking down at her. The air in the plaza, which had been still before, now felt thick as honey. You could have heard a pin drop on the grass 500 feet away. Maya's mind went completely blank. It was a white, buzzing static. All her careful preparation, her plan to be invisible, to just observe, it was gone, blown away like dust. Her body was rigid. She could feel the rough fabric of the folding chair under her legs, the crushing pressure of her mother's hand in hers, the frantic drumbeat of her own heart in her ears. She was aware of hundreds of faces, all turned in her direction, but she couldn't see a single one of them clearly. The only thing in focus was the man standing before her. He was taller up close. His uniform was a deep, perfect blue, and the 4 stars on his shoulder seemed to catch every bit of the sunlight. His face was lined with age and experience, but his eyes were clear and sharp. They held no ceremony in them now, no practiced speech. They just looked at her, and in them she saw a deep, endless well of understanding. It was the look of someone who had seen countless doors knocked on, countless families shattered, and had carried that weight for decades. He didn't smile. This wasn't a moment for smiling. But his expression was gentle. He bent his head just a little towards her, breaking the immense formality of his posture to meet her at her level. "You are Chief Carter's daughter," he said. His voice was low, meant only for her and her mother, but in the perfect silence, it seemed to ring out for everyone. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, simple and solid. Maya tried to speak. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Her throat had closed tight. All she could manage was a small, jerky nod. Yes, the general's eyes softened further. He glanced for a second at her mother, seeing the same shock and dawning emotion on her face, and gave her the same respectful nod. Then he looked back at Maya. "I served with your father a long time ago," he said, his tone conversational, as if they were the only two people there. On that cold exercise I mentioned, he never talked much about himself. But one night, during a quiet moment, he pulled out a picture. The general's mouth hinted at the memory of a smile. It was a photo of a little girl with curls, sitting on a big red bicycle with training wheels. He was so proud of that picture. He said, "That's my Maya. She's trying to learn how to ride. I promised her I'd run beside her when I got home." A silent sob broke from Maya's chest. It was a sound she didn't even know she made. The memory flooded her, bright and painful. The red bike, the promise, the waiting that turned into forever. She had forgotten that detail, buried it under years of quieter grief. And here was this stranger, this towering figure of authority, bringing it back to her with perfect clarity. He had held that story for all these years. The general paused, letting the weight of his words settle. He looked from her face out to the sea of silent, watching people, and then back to her. When he spoke again, his voice was still quiet, but it carried a new gravity, a power that was for everyone to hear. "The strength of our nation," he said slowly, clearly, "doesn't just stand on the front lines. It doesn't just reside in the courage of warriors like your father." He leaned in slightly, his gaze locking with hers. "It sits in chairs like yours. It grows in the hearts of families who serve in silence, who bear the absence, who honor the promise every single day, without a uniform, without a medal, without anyone ever seeing." He straightened up to his full height. The gentle familiarity was gone, replaced by the full imposing bearing of his rank. The air crackled. Every person in the audience held their breath. They knew they were witnessing something rare and real, something that broke every script. The general's shoulders went back. His spine became as straight as a steel rod. His face transformed into an expression of absolute, unwavering respect. He wasn't looking at a crowd anymore. He wasn't looking at a stage. His entire world, in that moment, was the young woman in the simple dress. With a precision that was both sharp and fluid, he brought his right hand up. His fingers snapped together perfectly. His palm faced slightly inward. His hand moved in a clean, powerful arc until the tip of his fingers came to rest just beside his right eyebrow. He rendered a salute dot. It wasn't just any salute. It was a full, formal, dress uniform salute from a 4-star general. It was the highest sign of respect in his world. And it was directed not to a fellow soldier, not to a dignitary, but to her, to the daughter, to the quiet, overlooked girl who had carried her father's legacy in her heart for 18 years. The silence that followed was deafening. For 2 seconds, 3, it held. My eyes stared at the salute, at the proud, rigid line of his arm, at the profound respect etched into his face. The meaning of it crashed over her in a wave. This wasn't for her because she had done anything grand. This was for all the years she had been strong. This was for her mother's silent tears. This was for the empty chair at every birthday. This was for her father, delivered through her dot. And then, as if a dam had burst, the sound returned to the world. It started with a single choked clap from somewhere in the back. Then another. And then the entire plaza erupted. It wasn't just applause. It was a thunderous, rolling, emotional standing ovation. People were on their feet, their faces wet with tears, their hands coming together in a wave of sound that felt like it would lift the roof off the sky. They were applauding for her, for the general's act, for every family in the crowd, for every unseen sacrifice. Maya didn't hear the roar. She saw it. She felt it vibrate in the ground. But in her own bubble of space, there was only quiet. She looked up at the general, who held his salute steady amidst the storm of sound. Slowly, shakily, she let go of her mother's hand and stood up. She didn't know what to do. She wasn't in the military. She couldn't salute back. So she simply stood straight, looked him in the eye, and did the only thing that felt true. She placed her right hand over her heart, and she nodded again as the tears she had held back for a lifetime finally, freely streamed down her face. The general held his salute for a few more seconds, a timeless island of stillness in the roaring sea of applause. Then, with the same deliberate care, he lowered his hand. The movement was final, like the last note of a powerful song. He gave Maya one more nod, a look that said everything he could not. Asterisk, well done. Carry on. Asterisk. Then he turned, and with that same calm, unhurried pace, he walked back down the aisle toward the stage. Maya stood, her hand still over her heart, watching him go. The sound of the clapping and the feeling of hundreds of eyes on her back should have been overwhelming, but she felt strangely calm inside the eye of the hurricane. Her mother stood up beside her, wrapping an arm tightly around her waist, holding her as much for her own support as for Maya's. They stood together, two women bound by love and loss, now also bound by this unbelievable moment. The general did not return to the podium. He took his seat on the stage, his face returning to its composed, professional expression, as if the most extraordinary thing in the world had not just happened. But the ceremony had been transformed. The final speaker tried to continue, but the energy in the plaza was different now. It was electric, emotional, human. People kept glancing toward Maya, their eyes no longer passing over her, but seeing her, truly seeing her, with warmth and respect. When the event officially ended, the crowd did not rush to leave. A space seemed to open around Maya and her mother. People approached, but slowly, carefully. An older woman with silver hair, the mother of another fallen sailor, came up and without a word, simply took Maya's hand in both of hers and squeezed it. A burly man in a veteran's jacket, his own eyes red-rimmed, gave her a firm, slow nod. "Your dad was a good man," he said, his voice gravelly. "The best." One by one, they came, not to gawk, but to connect. To say, in their own ways, "We see your sacrifice too." A young naval officer, his uniform crisp, approached and stood at attention. "Ma'am," he said to Maya's mother, and then to Maya, "the general would be honored if you would join him for a moment before you depart. If you're willing." Maya looked at her mother, who was still holding on to her, looking stunned but proud. Her mother nodded. "I think we should," she whispered. They were led not to a public area, but to a quiet corner of the new building, an office with a view of the memorial wall. The general was there, without the crowd of aides. He looked more like a tired grandfather now, the immense weight of his rank momentarily set aside. "Thank you for coming," he said to them both. He looked at Maya's mother. "Elena, your husband spoke of you often. His love for you was his compass." Maya watched as her mother's careful composure finally broke. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. But for the first time in years, it seemed a tear of released pride, not just of pain. He turned to Maya. "I apologize for the surprise," he said, a hint of genuine concern in his eyes. "I saw you when I was scanning the crowd." "You have his eyes." And then, when they asked the children to stand, you stood so quickly, so bravely, and then you sat back down, like you were carrying the weight of the world, but didn't want anyone to know. I knew who you were in my heart. I had to acknowledge that. Maya found her voice, small but steady. "Thank you for the story." "About the bike. I'd forgotten that." "He never did?" the general said simply. "That's what I wanted you to know today. It's not just a name on a wall. It's a man who loved you. And his service," he added, looking at them both, included having a family he believed in. "You are a living part of his legacy. Never forget that." They talked for a few more minutes, quiet, healing words about nothing and everything. Then, with a final handshake and another less formal nod, he let them go. The drive home was the reverse of the morning's journey, but everything had changed. The silence in the car was no longer heavy with dread, but peaceful, filled with a new kind of understanding. Maya leaned her head against the cool window, watching the military world fade back into the ordinary landscape of towns and trees. She didn't feel like a different person. She was still the same girl who had lost her dad, the same young woman who held her memories close. But something had shifted. The quiet pride she had carried alone for so long had been witnessed. It had been validated by the highest authority possible. That invisible weight was still there, but it no longer felt like a secret burden. It felt like a foundation. Weeks later, life returned to its normal rhythm. Work, friends, quiet evenings at home. But sometimes, when she was feeling unsure or small, she would remember that moment in the plaza. The silence, the directness of his gaze, the powerful, perfect arc of the salute. One afternoon, she was in a grocery store. A man in line ahead of her, wearing a cap that showed he was a veteran, was struggling to count out his change, his hands a little unsteady. The cashier looked impatient. Without even thinking, Maya stepped forward. "Here, let me help," she said softly, and she covered the last few cents he was short. The man looked up, surprised and grateful. "Thank you, young lady," he said. "Thank you for your service," Maya replied. And she meant it, in a way she never fully could before. She understood the ecosystem of sacrifice now, not just her father's part, but the part of the families, the veterans. The quiet struggles dot as she walked out into the sunlight. She realized the general's salute hadn't just been for her past. It was for her future. It was a passing of the torch. Her father's legacy wasn't just about remembering his death. It was about how she chose to live. With kindness, with quiet strength, with an open heart that recognized sacrifice in all its forms. She was no longer the SEAL girl who was overlooked. She was Maya, her father's daughter. And she carried that title not as a hidden shadow, but as a quiet light, finally seen, and now ready to shine in her own gentle way. The salute had ended, but its meaning was just beginning to live.